She didn't whisper. She didn't hint. She went straight for the jugular. After months of silence, Jaguar Wright finally spoke. And what she said about Nicki Minaj's transformation stunned everyone watching. This wasn't about music. This wasn't about politics. This was about alignment. According to Jaguar, something changed behind closed doors. The energy shifted, the messaging flipped, and the woman who once symbolized rebellion suddenly sounded like the system she used to fight. Fans noticed it. Industry insiders felt it, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Until now. What happens when influence becomes currency? When silence becomes strategy? And when power demands a trade? Stay with us, because this isn't a cancellation story. It's a story about control, loyalty, and the moment an icon chose a different side. For a long time, Jaguar Wright stayed quiet. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew exactly what would happen when she did. Silence, in this case, wasn't fear. It was timing. According to those familiar with her perspective, Jaguar had been watching the shift unfold slowly. Not overnight. Not with one statement or one appearance, but through patterns. Language changed, associations shifted, messaging hardened. And the transformation didn't sit right. When Nicki Minaj began leaning into a new ideological tone, one that felt aggressive, nationalistic, and deliberately polarizing, fans argued whether it was strategy or belief. Jaguar didn't argue. She observed. She said the change wasn't about conviction. It was about positioning. According to Jaguar, this wasn't rebellion. It was realignment. A calculated move toward power structures that reward loyalty over authenticity. She claimed the industry doesn't punish everyone equally. Some people are canceled, others are repositioned, and repositioning comes with conditions. Jaguar didn't accuse. She contextualized. She said when artists reach a certain level, the conversation stops being about expression and starts being about utility. Who are you useful to? Who do you amplify? Who do you protect? According to her, Nicki Minaj didn't change sides emotionally. She changed alliances. Jaguar described it as a transaction, not financial, but symbolic. Visibility in exchange for alignment, protection in exchange for silence on certain issues, and amplification of others. That's why the shift felt sudden. Because it wasn't organic, it was negotiated. She said the most disturbing part wasn't the ideology itself, it was the discipline. How quickly narratives were enforced, how critics were dismissed, how questioning became betrayal. Jaguar pointed out that true rebellion invites chaos. This felt controlled. She explained that when someone with massive influence adopts rhetoric that benefits systems they once challenged, it's rarely accidental. It's permissioned. She didn't say Nicki Minaj was forced. She said she was incentivized, and that distinction mattered. According to Jaguar, this is how power works in entertainment. You don't need to silence someone. You just need to give them a reason to speak differently. The silence Jaguar broke wasn't about outrage. It was about warning. She said when artists trade complexity for protection, the audience pays the price. Culture flattens. Conversation narrows. And loyalty is tested, not to truth, but to narrative. She emphasized that this wasn't about one person. It was about a pattern, one she's seen before. Artists reach influence. Systems take interest. Alignment is offered. And dissent becomes inconvenient. Jaguar said the reason she finally spoke was simple. Too many people were pretending not to see the shift, and pretending has consequences. She wasn't asking people to cancel anyone. She was asking them to pay attention, because when icons change language, culture follows. And when culture follows quietly, control wins loudly. This wasn't about soul selling in a mythical sense. It was about trade-offs. And according to Jaguar, every trade has a cost, even when the benefits look powerful. According to Jaguar Wright, the shift people noticed wasn't random. It followed a familiar pattern she's seen play out many times before. Not loudly, not publicly, but structurally. She explained that in the upper layers of influence, ideology is rarely about belief. It's about alignment. Who you echo, who you challenge, and who you stop challenging altogether. That's where the trade begins. According to Jaguar, when an artist reaches a certain level of reach, they stop being treated like a voice and start being treated like a lever, something that can move audiences, normalize language, and redirect energy. And levers don't move themselves. She said the trade is never presented as betrayal. It's presented as opportunity, access, protection, longevity. Stay visible. Stay relevant. Stay safe. Those phrases sound harmless until you understand what they cost. According to Jaguar, the first thing exchanged isn't integrity, it's silence. Silence on topics that once mattered. Silence when alignment would be inconvenient. Silence when dissent could jeopardize access. She claimed that once that silence is accepted, everything else becomes negotiable. Messaging tightens. Language simplifies. Opposition becomes noise. And suddenly, rebellion looks different. Jaguar described how this trade rarely feels like selling out in the moment. It feels like evolution, like maturity, like choosing stability over chaos. But stability has a price. She said the most dangerous part of the trade isn't what's gained, it's what's normalized. Audiences get used to hearing certain talking points from familiar voices. What once felt extreme starts feeling ordinary. That's how influence works. Not through force, through familiarity. According to Jaguar, when Nicki Minaj adopted a tone that aligned with rigid, power-friendly narratives, it wasn't about conviction. It was about permission. Permission to occupy spaces previously closed. Permission to be protected from consequences others face. She emphasized that protection is currency, and like all currency, it's earned through exchange. Jaguar said the industry doesn't ask artists to lie. It asks them to redirect, to focus attention on some things while starving others. That redirection shapes culture quietly. She also pointed out how criticism suddenly gets reframed. Questioning becomes hate. Accountability becomes attack. Once alignment is secured, dissent is delegitimized. That's when the trade becomes visible. According to Jaguar, fans often sense this before analysts do. They feel the disconnect, the tonal shift, the emotional distance. Something feels rehearsed instead of raw, but fans are told they're imagining it. She said the trade relies on that doubt. If people question their instincts long enough, the shift becomes normalized. Jaguar wasn't accusing Nicki Minaj of abandoning her audience. She was accusing the system of rewarding compliance. And compliance, once rewarded, spreads. She explained that this is why some voices are elevated during moments of cultural tension, not because they're insightful, but because they're useful. Usefulness is valued over truth. She said the reason she broke her silence now was because the trade had moved from subtle to obvious, from positioning to messaging, from alignment to enforcement. Once enforcement appears, choice disappears, and that's when silence becomes complicity. Jaguar warned that the audience often underestimates how fast these trades ripple outward. When a major voice shifts, others recalibrate. Managers advise caution. Creators self-censor. Not because they agree, but because they see what alignment protects. She called this the chilling effect. Not loud censorship, quiet adjustment. According to her, the real danger isn't one artist's choice. It's the ecosystem that rewards it. She said when people talk about selling a soul, they imagine a dramatic moment, a sudden betrayal. In reality, it's incremental. One silence, one compromise, one redirected message, until the original voice is barely recognizable. Jaguar wasn't asking people to pick sides. She was asking them to recognize patterns. Because once you see the trade, you start noticing it everywhere. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. She ended this part of her commentary with a warning rather than an accusation. She said when influence is traded for protection, culture loses friction. Without friction, power moves unchecked. And unchecked power doesn't need loyalty, it needs amplification. That's why this trade matters. Not because of who made it, but because of what it teaches others is possible and profitable. According to Jaguar Wright, the real consequences don't appear when the alignment happens. They appear after, not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, in ways most people miss, unless they're looking closely. She explained that once an artist accepts protection, the environment around them changes first. Not the music, not the visuals, the responses. Certain doors open faster, certain criticisms disappear, certain risks no longer apply. That's when the shift becomes structural. Jaguar said the artist doesn't suddenly feel controlled. In fact, they often feel freer. Less resistance, less friction, less pushback. That absence can feel like peace. But peace earned through alignment isn't neutral, it's conditional. According to Jaguar, the first thing that disappears is contradiction. Voices that once challenged start agreeing. Platforms that once questioned start amplifying. Opposition becomes rare, and when it appears, it's framed as hostility instead of critique. That framing matters, because it trains the audience to see disagreement as danger. She described how this environment slowly reshapes decision-making. When alignment brings ease, deviation feels costly, not because someone threatens you, but because comfort becomes the new baseline, and people protect comfort instinctively. Jaguar said the most subtle change happens internally. The artist begins to self-edit, not consciously, but reflexively. Topics feel off-limits, without being named. Certain opinions feel heavier to express. That's how conditioning works. No rules, no orders, just incentives. She also noted how language changes. Words become sharper. Positions become absolute. Nuance fades. Complexity gets replaced with certainty. Certainty is easier to defend, but it's also easier to deploy. According to Jaguar, this is when the audience starts noticing something's off. The artist sounds different, not wrong, but rigid, less exploratory, less curious. That rigidity signals alignment. She said after the deal, the artist doesn't lose influence. They gain utility. Utility is different. Influence persuades. Utility redirects. And redirection is far more valuable to systems than persuasion. Jaguar explained that once utility is established, protection follows automatically. Controversies are softened. Mistakes are contextualized. Criticism is diluted. The rules change, quietly. She emphasized that this isn't favoritism, it's investment protection. Once an artist becomes useful, protecting them protects the investment. That's when accountability shifts. Not eliminated, reframed. Jaguar said this is why some artists appear untouchable. Not because they're flawless, but because consequences are managed. And management replaces responsibility. She also described how peers react. Some distance themselves. Others align closer. Many stay silent, not because they agree, but because they're watching. Watching how alignment pays. Watching what gets rewarded. Watching what gets ignored. That observation shapes behavior across the industry. Jaguar called this the ripple phase. One deal influences many decisions, not through instruction, through example. She said the most disturbing part isn't what the aligned artist says, it's what others stop saying. The silence spreads, creators hesitate, commentators soften, conversations narrow, not because people suddenly agree, but because disagreement feels inefficient. And inefficiency isn't rewarded. According to Jaguar, this is when culture starts losing texture. Everything becomes binary, for or against, with or without. That simplification benefits power. Power doesn't thrive on complexity. It thrives on clarity that can be controlled. She warned that once an artist becomes part of this system, leaving it is costly. Not because of punishment, but because protection disappears. When protection disappears, friction returns. And friction feels like hostility after comfort. Jaguar said this is why artists rarely reverse course publicly, not because they can't, but because they don't want to experience unprotected space again. Silence becomes safer than dissent. She clarified that none of this requires malicious intent. Most artists don't think in terms of selling out. They think in terms of survival, longevity, relevance. The system is designed to make alignment feel like wisdom. She also addressed fans who argue that evolution is natural. She agreed, evolution is natural, but evolution doesn't erase curiosity. Alignment does. She said when evolution is real, questions increase. When alignment happens, questions disappear. That's the difference. Jaguar claimed that after the deal, the artist's role changes. They stop being a mirror of culture and become a megaphone for it. Not reflecting, projecting. And projection moves faster. She ended this part with a sobering observation. Once an artist becomes utility, their individuality becomes secondary. They're valued not for what they feel, but for what they can move. And movement without resistance is power's favorite form. This is why the aftermath matters more than the deal itself. Because once the deal is done, culture adjusts, quietly, efficiently, and often without realizing what it just lost. According to Jaguar Wright, the most misunderstood part of the trade isn't why artists align. It's why they don't reverse. People assume silence afterward is proof of agreement, or guilt, or comfort. Jaguar says it's something else entirely. It's containment. She explained that once alignment solidifies, the environment around an artist changes in subtle but decisive ways. Not through threats, not through ultimatums, through structure. Access becomes conditional, platforms become selective, support becomes quiet but precise. The artist doesn't feel silenced, they feel guided. Guidance sounds supportive. It's framed as wisdom, as strategy, as protection from backlash. And protection is persuasive. Jaguar said the most dangerous thing about protection is how quickly it becomes invisible. Once someone is protected long enough, they forget what unprotected feels like, and that forgetting changes behavior. According to her, speaking out after alignment isn't forbidden, it's discouraged. Not explicitly, implicitly, through reminders of risk, through examples of what happens to others who step out of line. No one needs to threaten you when precedent does the work. She described how conversations shift. Language like, "this isn't the right time," or "this could be misunderstood," starts appearing. Not as censorship, as concern. Concern that always points in one direction. Stay quiet, stay aligned, stay safe. Jaguar said this is why reversals are rare. Not because artists don't see the problem, but because leaving alignment means re-entering friction. And friction feels violent after comfort. She explained that the moment an artist considers speaking out, they don't just imagine criticism, they imagine withdrawal, support that evaporates, amplification that disappears, doors that quietly close, not slammed, closed softly. That softness makes it harder to resist. According to Jaguar, the system doesn't punish dissent loudly because loud punishment creates martyrs. Instead, it isolates dissent quietly. Isolation doesn't create heroes, it creates cautionary tales. She said this is why aligned artists often sound defensive when questioned. Not because they're wrong, but because they're cornered. Any deviation threatens the protection they now rely on, and reliance changes priorities. Jaguar emphasized that this doesn't require malicious intent. Most artists believe they're choosing the lesser evil, stability over chaos, longevity over conflict. But those choices accumulate, and eventually, silence stops being a choice. It becomes habit. She described how internal conflict grows in that space. The artist feels tension between what they know and what they can say. But speaking risks destabilizing everything they've built under protection. So they rationalize. They tell themselves it's temporary, strategic, necessary, and then time passes. According to Jaguar, time is the system's greatest ally. The longer silence lasts, the harder it is to break. Not because of fear, but because of distance. Distance from the original voice. Distance from the original values. Distance makes reversal feel unnatural. She said this is why some artists eventually sound unrecognizable, not because they changed overnight, but because the silence slowly edited them. They didn't abandon who they were, They outgrew the space where that voice was allowed. Jaguar also pointed out how audiences unintentionally reinforce this. Fans defend alignment because it feels safer. Conflict threatens enjoyment. Silence preserves comfort. So silence gets rewarded. Speaking out gets complicated. She said the most telling sign is when aligned artists talk a lot, but say very little. Long statements, strong tone, clear positioning. But no curiosity, no questioning, no vulnerability. That absence is the cost. According to Jaguar, once vulnerability disappears, so does the ability to reverse course. Vulnerability is what allows growth. Without it, alignment calcifies. She wasn't accusing anyone of weakness. She was describing architecture, an architecture designed to make silence feel reasonable and dissent feel reckless. And once that architecture is in place, speaking out doesn't feel like courage. It feels like self-sabotage. That's why most don't do it. She said people often ask, why doesn't she just say how she really feels? The answer is simple. Because really no longer fits inside the structure. Speaking truth requires space. Alignment removes space. Jaguar ended this part with a warning. The danger isn't that artists can't speak out. It's that after a while, they stop remembering how. And when enough voices forget how to speak freely, culture doesn't collapse. It contracts. Quietly, efficiently, without protest. That's why the silence after alignment matters more than the alignment itself. Because silence is where systems reveal their strength. According to Jaguar Wright, the most revealing moments aren't when an artist aligns. They're when an artist hesitates, not publicly, not dramatically, but internally. She explained that the system doesn't panic when someone aligns. It relaxes. Alignment confirms predictability. It stabilizes expectations. It makes outcomes easier to manage. But hesitation triggers alarms. Jaguar said that when an artist even considers stepping back from alignment, the environment around them subtly shifts. Not in obvious ways, in quiet recalibrations. Support becomes conditional. Conversations become shorter. Opportunities require reconsideration. Nothing is said directly. Nothing needs to be. According to Jaguar, the first response isn't punishment, it's reminder. Reminders of how far someone has come, of what they have to lose, of how volatile public opinion can be. Those reminders are framed as care. We don't want you misunderstood. This could hurt your brand. Timing matters. Care that always points towards silence. She said this is where many people stop. Not because they're weak, but because the cost of walking away suddenly feels real. Walking away doesn't mean going back to neutrality. It means entering unprotected space. Jaguar described unprotected space as unpredictable. Criticism lands harder. Mistakes linger longer. Support fragments instead of consolidating. Artists who have lived under protection feel that contrast immediately. And contrast is powerful. She explained that when someone tries to walk away, they don't face open hostility, they face absence. Invitations stop arriving. Amplification slows. Familiar advocates become distant. Nothing dramatic enough to call out. Just enough to feel. She called this the quiet consequence phase. No one says you're being punished. You're just no longer prioritized. According to Jaguar, this is often when artists start questioning themselves. Not the system, themselves. Am I being unreasonable? Is this worth it? Maybe I'm overthinking. The system relies on that doubt, because doubt keeps people still. She also pointed out that walking away isn't just about ideology, it's about identity. Once an artist has been publicly associated with alignment, reversing course threatens their image. Fans feel confused, critics feel validated, narratives flip, and flips are messy. Jaguar said this is why many artists choose to stay silent rather than contradict their previous positioning. Silence allows ambiguity. Reversal demands clarity. Clarity invites judgment. She described how some artists attempt a soft exit. They reduce commentary, shift focus, redirect energy to work, avoid topics that feel charged. Sometimes that works, but even that requires permission. According to Jaguar, when someone begins disengaging, the system watches closely. Disengagement signals unpredictability, and unpredictability is the one thing power doesn't tolerate. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's inefficient. She said that in some cases, artists who try to walk away get labeled, not publicly, professionally, difficult, unreliable, complicated. Those labels don't end careers, they narrow them. And narrowing is often more effective than canceling. Jaguar emphasized that none of this requires a coordinated conspiracy. It's cultural muscle memory. Systems respond to deviation the same way bodies respond to pain. They restrict movement. She also addressed the myth that walking away is heroic. Sometimes it is, but often it's lonely. There's no applause, no immediate validation, just loss of certainty. She said many people imagine that leaving alignment brings freedom. It does. But freedom comes with friction, and friction is exhausting. That's why most people don't walk away dramatically. They retreat quietly. Jaguar said this is why silence after alignment can mean two opposite things. It can mean compliance, or it can mean resistance that hasn't found a safe exit yet. From the outside, they look the same. That ambiguity protects the system. She warned against assuming intention. Not every silent artist agrees. Not every aligned voice is committed. Many are navigating trade-offs that don't have clean solutions. She said the real danger is when audiences demand purity without understanding cost. Demanding immediate reversal ignores how deeply embedded alignment becomes. Walking away isn't a statement. It's a process, and processes take time. Jaguar ended this part by saying that the artists who do manage to leave rarely announce it. They don't make speeches. They don't frame it as redemption. They just change, slowly, quietly, without explanation. Because explanation invites negotiation, and negotiation invites control. She said the system doesn't fear loud rebellion. It fears quiet autonomy. And that's why walking away is so difficult. Not because it's forbidden, but because it requires accepting less protection, less certainty, less comfort, in exchange for integrity. And not everyone is ready to make that trade. According to Jaguar Wright, the most dangerous mistake people make is thinking this story is about one person's choices. It isn't. It's about what those choices normalize. She explained that culture doesn't shift because of speeches or policies. It shifts because of repetition. Because familiar voices say unfamiliar things often enough that they stop feeling unfamiliar. That's how alignment becomes invisible. And invisibility is power's favorite state. Jaguar said, when an influential figure adjusts their tone, their silence, or their priorities, the effect doesn't stop with their audience. It moves outward, to peers, to fans, to industries that watch closely. People recalibrate, not because they're told to, but because they're paying attention. She described this moment as a signal flare, not loud, not explosive, but unmistakable to those who know how to read it. It tells others what is acceptable, what is rewarded, what is protected, and just as importantly, what is costly. According to Jaguar, the danger isn't ideological difference. Healthy cultures can handle disagreement. The danger is when disagreement disappears because silence becomes the safer option. That's when culture stops evolving. It starts contracting. She warned that when enough influential voices choose alignment over curiosity, the range of acceptable thought narrows. Conversations become repetitive. Dissent feels exhausting. Complexity feels risky. Eventually, people stop asking hard questions, not because answers don't matter, but because asking feels pointless. That's how control works without enforcement. Jaguar emphasized that this doesn't require bad intentions. Most people don't wake up planning to suppress culture. They make individual decisions that feel rational in isolation. But isolation is an illusion. Every decision made under protection sends a message. She said the reason she finally broke her silence was because the message had become too clear to ignore. Too many people were adjusting themselves without realizing why. Too many creators were second-guessing instincts they once trusted. Too many audiences were confusing confidence with certainty. She wanted to interrupt that process, not by attacking anyone, but by naming the structure. Because structures lose power when they're visible. She explained that once people understand how alignment works, they can choose more consciously. They can recognize when comfort is being offered in exchange for silence. When protection is conditional. Awareness doesn't dismantle systems overnight, but it weakens them. Jaguar said this moment matters because it forces a choice, not just for artists, but for audiences. Do you reward curiosity or certainty? Do you support nuance or simplicity? Do you value comfort or challenge? Those choices shape culture more than any single figure ever could. She also addressed the idea that culture always survives, that it adapts no matter what. She agreed, culture survives, but survival isn't the same as health. A culture can survive while becoming brittle, while losing elasticity, while punishing risk and rewarding conformity. She said this is the stage many don't recognize until it's too late, when everything feels stable, but nothing feels alive. Jaguar didn't frame this as doom. She framed it as decision-making. Every era has moments where alignment becomes tempting, where power offers safety in exchange for flexibility, where silence looks like wisdom, and every era decides whether to accept that trade. She said this is one of those moments, not because of one artist's choices, but because of how quickly those choices were absorbed without question. She ended by reminding people of something uncomfortable. Systems don't need everyone to agree. They only need most people to stay quiet. Silence isn't neutral, it's directional. And when silence consistently points the same way, culture follows. And Jaguar said the reason she spoke wasn't to convince anyone of a conclusion, but to reintroduce friction, to remind people that disagreement isn't danger, that questioning isn't betrayal, that silence should be chosen, not conditioned. She said this story doesn't end with exposure or cancellation. It ends with awareness. Once people see how alignment works, they can decide how much of it they're willing to accept. As creators, as fans, as participants in culture. She closed with a final observation. The most powerful systems don't silence people. They make silence feel reasonable. And the moment people realize that, truly realize it, is the moment culture starts breathing again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but freely. Like, subscribe, and share.